But we bring you this now. MP Andrew Whitfield is calling for the implementation of a bill that will make DNA sample test collection compulsory. And he says without the bill, convicted murderers and rapists are free to continue their terror sprees, safe in the knowledge that their DNA probably will not be matched. Whitfield joins us now to talk more about this. And thank you so much for your time, Andrew. I think this is quite an important conversation to note, but I would like to just bring up some scary stats here. When we look at this, it seems Gauteng, out of all the provinces, is the province with the highest number of convicted prisoners, listen to this, who were released on parole without their DNA samples even being taken. Surely this cannot be true in a country that is rigged, with gender-based violence, femicide, rape, so much atrocities against women. But unfortunately, it is the reality.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific, and thank you very much for having me, Tumelo. I think it's important to start with the fact that in 2013, Parliament passed the DNA bill, and in 2014, it was assented to by the President. It became an act of law, and it was required, amongst other things, in that piece of legislation, that all Schedule 8 convicted offenders must submit their DNA samples in order to be loaded onto the convicted offenders database, so that in the event that they are released on parole, there would be the capability for the state to be able to connect any future crimes back to their original crimes, thereby incurring longer sentences and ensuring justice for victims. Now, in that piece of legislation, there was a transitional provision which allowed for the compulsory mandatory sampling of DNA from convicted offenders. That transitional provision expired in 2017. And we've now been waiting for the draft bill for 4 years, which has been sitting in cabinet, which would allow us to ensure that compulsory sampling can be done again from these violent offenders.
Right. So my understanding is you had posed a question to the Correctional Services Minister, Ronald Lamola, about this. Particularly, you were asking about this, why those convicted Schedule 8 offenders who were rather not added to that National Forensic DNA database, or rather even convicted offenders, or rather released on parole each year, understand since January 2016. What was the answer that you received from the Minister, and was it satisfactory?
Well, we know why, and the reason why is because the draft DNA amendment bill has been sitting in cabinet for 4 years, which prevents the South African Police Service from ensuring that it is compulsory for these offenders to submit their DNA samples. What we didn't know was what the scale of the parolees who've been let out without their DNA being sampled was, and it comes up to 96,800 people. That's almost 100,000 convicted Schedule 8 offenders who've now been released on parole, where the state has no ability to connect any future rapes, murders, violent sexual assaults back to their original crimes. And there was a guy called Sikangele in the Western Cape many years ago who was arrested for assault, and because his DNA was taken, he was able to be linked back to previous crimes, and he incurred 15 life sentences. So it is an incredibly powerful piece of enabling legislation that would allow us to ensure that there's justice for victims. And as long as Cabinet is sitting on their hands, I'm afraid that more victims of GBV and other heinous violent crimes will go without any justice whatsoever.
Yeah, but at the same time, Andrew, Minister Ronald Lamola said that the job, or the task of DNA sampling or taking in those DNA samples rests with the SAPS. Why isn't the SAPS doing its job? Why isn't Minister Begicele following up to ensure that these DNA samples are taken and are used as critical parts of, investigations and evidence, in these types of cases?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is the Minister of Police and the National Police Commissioner which are responsible in terms of the current legislation. And in fact, it was the Ministry of Police which drafted this DNA amendment bill. But the reason, Tumelo, that they don't want to bring this to Parliament is because Cabinet is deciding whether or not to have a national population DNA database where innocent people like you and me would have to be compelled to submit our DNA. It's absolutely crazy. It would be unconstitutional. It would certainly be unaffordable. And it is absolutely no reason to delay bringing this critical piece of legislation to Parliament. So that is the reason that the Minister of Police is providing. We don't buy it. We think it's ridiculous. And civil society is now speaking up, and we have Action Society SA, who's now calling for the president, and they've sent a letter of demand to the president, calling for this bill to be brought to Parliament immediately so that we can do our jobs and ensure that there's justice for the victims of some of the most violent crimes in our country.
Absolutely, justice needs to be served in this case. And thank you for speaking to us, Andrew Whitfield, DA MP. Thank you for your time.